Hi, my name is Brett Cooper, and Jim Bodenhamer was my first boss. I was 17 years old and a senior at MHHS when Jim hired me into the newsroom at KTLO. He became my boss, my mentor, and a really dear friend. Jim taught me what it really is to be a news reporter. He showed me what it is to be diligent in gathering the facts and presenting them with clarity and with fairness to the listening audience, in this case at KTLO. I was one of those that would argue that stories on radio ought to be quicker. They ought to be more concise. They ought to use a lot of sound. Jim's determination was that all the facts need to be made known and let the audience sort those out. You know, he and I harassed each other for quite a while over one story in particular that he did. It was a 4.5-minute voicer. That means it was just Jim reading, no sound bites. It was a searing expose on the rising cost of head lettuce. Suffice it to say, no details were spared on taking us behind the scenes of the lettuce industry. Jim found his job to be more than a job. It was a calling. It was his duty. He understood something that I wish more people understood today about journalists, and that is that a big part of their job is to make sure the people's business, the business of government at all levels, is done transparently and above board. He was unflinching in reporting on what he found in those areas. I've seen Jim break a lot of big stories, some big scoops. I never saw him gloat over that. It was always just doing his duty. I have seen Jim have to break stories that were not pleasant, and some of the things they revealed about folks that Jim might have known for a long time, folks that had been longtime friends to Jim. He took no pleasure in doing that, but he was duty-bound to put all the facts out there fairly and evenly, regardless of who was involved or what the circumstance might be. Jim and Julie have remained great friends of mine down through the years. In fact, for a lot of years, when I would come back home for Christmas, I would get together with Jim and we would go to lunch. It took me a long time to realize that Jim would always bring up that it was my turn to buy. It took me longer than I'm proud to say to figure out what Jim was doing, and I was buying lunch every year because he would say, "It's your turn to buy." I took him at his word, and that was a mistake. When I finally mentioned to him that I always seemed to buy lunch, he owned up to it. He was kind of proud of it. But you know what? I still always have to buy lunch because in addition to being a liar, Jim is a cheapskate. So I continue to treat whenever I have a chance to get together with him. Jimbo, congratulations on a richly deserved honor. You have served the Mountain Home community, and you have done your duty with diligence. You have represented our alma mater so very well, and I'm glad you're being recognized for that. Congratulations to you. God bless you. Oh, and Jim, yes, next time we get together, lunch is on me.
So the main thing we're trying to figure out is, was there no one else that could go into the Hall of Honor this year? we figured that's the only way Jim could get in. No, it's much deserved, and Jim was a great newsman. I remember when I first moved here, and Jim was covering a trial over in Harrison, and he called in his report. And so I'm on the phone with him, recording him as he's calling in his report, and he was describing what the defendant was wearing, and he talked about his brown breeches. And I'm thinking, have I moved to Mayberry? What is this? Who talks about brown breeches on the air? But Jim was a great newsman, and obviously won lots of awards from the Associated Press year after year. And KTLO, under his direction, was the most awarded news station in the state for many, many years through the 80s and the 90s. And he taught a lot of folks the news business, some folks that went on to work other places at the Associated Press, and a great guy to be around. And Jim, this is much deserved, and congratulations.
There are these people in your life who make life better, and that person in my life is Jim Bodenhamer. We have been friends since back in the day. Even though Jim has been in the public eye, there may be some things about him that you don't know. I would like to share some of those with you. Governor Faubus was campaigning at nights store at Buford, and Jim was there with a bunch of boys. And he chose to put a rubber snake in the governor's car. It caused quite a stir, but nobody ever told who did it. It never failed that you saw him dashing up and down the hall with a pencil behind his ear while he was trying to get a story for the school paper, the Bomber News, and or the yearbook. Another really interesting thing he pulled is that he was asked to run an errand for Ms. Wood, the yearbook sponsor, and he and a friend were going to Morgan Drug. And along the way down the hall, they met Mr. Hackler. And he said, "Oh, well, if you're going to Morgan Drug, bring me a cherry Coke." So the boys said they would do that, and laughing, they went off and meanwhile decided to add laxative to this Coke. And so they did, and when they returned to school, very luckily for Mr. Hackler, they told a friend what they had done. The friend went to Ms. Wood and said, "Guess what the boys did?" Ms. Wood called Mr. Hackler and said, "Don't drink that." So the boys, thinking Mr. Hackler had the cherry Coke, were at the yearbook end of the year banquet that night, and Ms. Wood said, "Have you all heard about Mr. Hackler? He's really ill and in the hospital, and they're not sure what's wrong with him." And Jim and his friend were scared to death and miserable. The next morning, they were called into the superintendent's office, and Mr. Strachner and Mr. Hudson gave them a stern lecture. And it all fell apart when Mr. Hackler walked in laughing, and the boys were really surprised and didn't think it was funny. Then, what is really nice is that Jim went to see Mr. Hackler a few days before Mr. Hackler passed away, and Jim took him a can of cherry Coke. And they were just really, really good friends. Another thing you might like to know is Jim was chosen as one of the top 10 seniors when he graduated. Even with all of his mischief, the teachers still liked and respected him. Jim and his wife, Julie Stewart, have 4 children together, and they spend a lot of time with the children and their grandchildren. Jim is often babysitting, and he is doing always good deeds for the families. Something else you might need to know, that counting 7 months of active duty in 2003 for Iraqi freedom, he had nearly 3 years in the regular army. After active duty in 69 to 71, Jim joined the National Guard, serving as platoon leader and then company commander, and attaining the rank of captain. As a member of the National Guard and the Army Reserve, he served over 30 years. The Bodenhamer family is known for its journalism expertise. Jim inherited that. He worked for the Baxter Bulletin and then moved on to KTLO as news director. We in Mountain Home benefited from his news hound mentality, because he went every morning on KTLO. We woke up to Jim and Bob talking, and oh, how we miss it. Well, I asked him what he wanted people to know, and he said that he wanted everyone to know that he was the super stud of the class of 65, with all the girls fawning after him. I don't think I should tell you that, so I'm just going to say that he is receiving the highest honor an alum from Mountain Home High School can attain, and he certainly deserves it, because he is simply the best.